Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hammer Down. I'm your host, Mike Bush. Before I get into this episode, I want to share a little bit of behind the scenes information. Generally speaking, on Hammer Down, I'll bring a guest on, we'll record an episode, and then I'll give the fabulous editing team at Market Scale a week or so to really cut the episode together, make me sound professional, which is no small task. They are tremendous at what they do. And the reason I'm sharing this is usually, I don't do stuff that's hyper specific to the news because of the way we operate and because of the way we tackle a particular issue. And it's usually some issue that people don't know exists in the supply chain. It's okay to be a couple of days behind. The reason I'm sharing this is that today's guest is kind of all over the news. As people probably know, a vessel named the Dolly ran into a bridge in Baltimore, wiping out the bridge, eviscerating, everything that was in place here. And when I booked this guest, Dr. Sal Mercogliano, I was really excited because we were going to talk about the impact of the Jones Act, which is this law that makes everybody in supply chain roll their eyes when they hear it. Instead, we've got something way more interesting to talk about in this situation with Dolly and Sal. I have to be honest. Every time I open Feedly or Twitter, you're in a new publication. It's not an accident that people are seeing you as sort of the expert when it comes to supply chain and maritime. Let's start with the basic question. What do you do and why is everybody reaching out to you to find out what happened in Baltimore?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it. I love this opportunity to talk about this. I'm a big, huge, advocate for the maritime and supply chain. I don't know, Mike. I really don't. It's funny. I'm a former merchant mariner. I sailed ships for a living for a while. I worked ashore, so I got that experience being on the deck plates and in the office. So I have that perspective. I became an academic, so I went into the maritime archaeology side for a while, doing wrecks. But diving in the water is for young people. It's also not the most glamorous at times. So I became a maritime historian, but I had an opportunity to teach a course in maritime industry policy for the Merchant Marine Academy, which really allowed me to connect with people who are out in the industry, on a fairly routine basis. And then I actually, thanks to social media, things like Facebook at the time, we have this huge group of alumni from my university that get together. And these are people who are out in the industry all the time. So I'm hearing things all the time. I have a great source pool. And then the big thing was I started writing some policy pieces for G-Captain. And in March of 2021, Ever Given went sideways in the Suez. And I got a call by the CEO of G-Captain, John Conrad. And he said, "Hey, I got a call for a media inquiry. I can't do it. Would you do it?" I was like, "Sure." So I went on the BBC, and that started this whole mess. I came on and I'm a professor, so I talk to students. I break down very complex issues so that people can understand them. I don't dumb them down, but we just basically make it manageable. I actually do some broadcasting for my university's lacrosse team, so I'm used to doing kind of media in a little bit. And, I did the BBC and the BBC liked it and it went viral. I was on a whole series of things back in March of 2021, but I'm a professor. I got more to say. And so I had a YouTube channel where I was putting some lectures and stuff on. I said, I'll talk about the Ever Given. And I brought John Conrad on and it has grown ever since. I started my YouTube channel on March 22nd of 2021. I think I had 130 people on it. I think I had 3,000 views for the video myself and John Conrad did. And in the past 2 days, I've had 5 million views on the channel. I'm at 200 and almost 50,000 subscribers. It's crazy. And I think it's mainly because I have a social media presence, which I take very seriously. And seriously in that I do joke. I make fun all the time about things. But I provide good information and I provide timely information for it. And in the shipping industry, not everybody wants to talk. And I'm not with a shipping firm. I'm not with a carrier. I'm a academic who's 50,000 feet. I'm tenured. You can't fire me. So, I can say things. And I think that makes it appealing. So that's a very long answer to your question. I apologize.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. I think it sets the stage well. So before we touch on everything that went wrong in Baltimore and also where Baltimore goes from here, you may have read, you probably didn't need to, but Chris Mims, who's a Wall Street Journal reporter, wrote a book called Arriving Today. And in the book, he follows a micro USB chip from creation in Asia onto delivery in Minnesota. And one of the most interesting chapters, he actually walks through the process of getting a vessel with 20,000 or 30,000 containers into a port, it's not as simple as parallel parking a car. Can you talk a little bit about what it's let's set the stage for what went wrong with what could have gone right. How do you actually park a vessel that's that big, toting that many containers?
Well, I mean, this is you train for this for a long time, and it becomes very standard procedure for mariners out there. And one of the things you see is ships have gotten bigger and bigger, but our ability to control them has actually increased. And so when you bring a container ship and you bring it from Asia over to LA, let's say we're going into Los Angeles. With that, there's a whole batch of arrangements that take place before you ever arrive. So, if I'm on a container ship, I'm not booking the cargo. My concern is getting the cargo on the ship, making sure my stability is good, and I get from point A to point B on this set period of time. When you come in, there is a kind of symphony of movement that takes place. You get a pilot on board. These are local, expert mariners who come on board to provide advice to the ship's master to help control the vessel in and out of the port. So they bring in expertise. You get tugs. Tugboats are really essential because these big behemoths of the ships have controls. We have thrusters and positioning systems, but you have pesky things like wind, where you have a big, huge, massive sail area of a ship, and it becomes a problem. And you have the dock workers with the line handlers. You have your crew. One of the things that would amaze people really is the size of these crews. Dolly, coming out of Baltimore, which is almost 1,000 feet long, had 21 people on board. It's a very small crew because we automate. We have a lot of autonomy on vessels now. And so you orchestrate that up and assure, back in the home office, you have an army of people who are, they have the stow plan ready. They know which box is coming off. And so that when you're tying up the vessel, you get the ropes on, the lines on, and you're secure, you get the gangway down. You've got cranes coming across. You got stevedores and longshoremen coming on board. You're popping boxes off and you're moving. And understand, when you're in port, you're not making money for the company. You make money when you're moving. And so, when you arrive in a port, it's like, how fast can I get in? I want to get the boxes off, the next box is on, and then you're moving. It's one of the reasons why Dolly, for example, was leaving at 1 a.m, because it had to get out to sea, head to the Panama Canal, and go to Sri Lanka, halfway around the world. So there is a whole, and every day is Groundhog Day. It is the same day over and over again. As a deck officer, I had the watch. I had I may have the 4 to 8 watch. So at 4 a.m. to 8 a.m, I'm on watch. And 4 p.m. to 8 p.m, I'm on watch. And then in between those hours, maybe in the night, I'm sleeping 6 hours. During the day, there's other work that has to be done. So I'm getting overtime for it. It's great. I want my overtime. I want to do it. But it is just the same routine over and over again. And, even when you arrive in port, it's not like you bounce down the gangway and go out to town and have a good time. You don't have time for that. It's like, you shift to import shifts, and you got to monitor cargo. You're loading cargo. There's stability issues. There's so much that has to go on. So it is not as easy. It's the same for truck drivers and rail operators and aviation. There is that movement that becomes normal to us. It's just, it's the way we do business. But sometimes you forget that you're moving, 20,000 tons of cargo in a day, because it's so seamless at times.
Sure, understood. So now a vessel comes into port. Obviously, lots of steps. In the book, reading about the pilot was the most interesting thing in the world. I thought this was like the craziest valet parking job imaginable, right? And then, of course, the way it breaks down here at LA Long Beach is, the vessel gets over near the waterfront. That you put a couple of tugboats to actually push the vessel up against the dock before you drop the ropes. So there, to your point, there is a lot of movement and a lot of different people involved in this. Looking at everything that happened in Baltimore, and I don't want to speculate on it. Is there anything that stood out to you in watching the video that says, hey, something, we saw the power go on, go out, go on again. Is there anything there that says, wow, this was massive. This was crazy. What stood out as kind of odd to you, I guess?
Let's talk about one thing prior to that, and that is how much we have changed in the terms of ocean shipping. I mean, we have increased the volume and velocity of cargo that's moving. And you could just see that in the size of ships. Everybody's talking about Dolly. It's a big ship. It's a huge ship. It's massive. It is a medium-sized container ship. Let's be clear. This is not the biggest ship out there. You look at Ever Given in the Suez. That's a 1,400-foot long ship that carried 20,000, TEU. Dolly is under 1,000 feet and carries 10,000 TEU. So she's a
Right.
big ship, but she is not the biggest. But she is big for the infrastructure in Baltimore. One of the things we've seen in the port of Baltimore is we've seen the expansion of the port. We dredged the port. We put new cranes in because they opened the new lane of the Panama Canal in 2016. But they haven't changed the bridge. And that's one of the big things I think we're seeing right here is a bridge that was built in 1977. The ships that went underneath it in 1977 were 500 feet long, maybe 20,000 tons, not 1,000 feet long and 90,000 tons. So, I mean, we've changed that. When watching the Dolly come out, it experienced the worst nightmare I ever had on a ship, and that is utter silence, quiet. It is to this day when I still talk about this. I've been talking about this like nonstop, but every time I say that phrase, I get a right in the pit of my stomach because I remember when it happened to me, and it is the worst feeling I've ever had. I was actually on the back of a ship. We were getting ready to tie up, and I was actually I was on the stern. I was the one in charge of tying up the ship, and I was actually lying on a series of mooring lines. I was half asleep, and I'm just kind of there, and all of a sudden it got quiet, and it woke me straight up, panicked, and it's the worst fear I could ever imagine for that crew, because with no power, they have no control. You don't have rudder control. You don't have engine control. You are literally under the forces of momentum and wind and current, and it had to be the worst. Now, what we're thinking is something caused the power outage. We don't know. Was it bad fuel? Was it electronic? Was it mechanical? Was it human? You can't just throw a switch and the ship goes off, but there are things that could happen to it. We saw the emergency power come up. I have a question about whether or not they had rudder control. The emergency generator should give them rudder control so that they should have still been able to steer the vessel. It appears they couldn't. So that's a question I have. They tried to restart the main engine, but they never fixed the underlying problem. That's why the power goes out the second time. They get main power back up, and then it goes back out again. And unfortunately, the infrastructure in Baltimore did not prepare the bridge. And so what you basically had were these two massive pilings that held both ends of the bridge that were exposed. I mean, you could basically sail right up to them. There was no barriers. There was no dolphins or anything out there. And so you had literally a ship just take out one of the pillars. And the way that bridge was designed, a continuous length bridge, when you knock out one leg of it, it's going to take the whole thing down.
Got it. Are there, understanding that there's, several ports across America, I don't remember the exact number, I think it's in the 30s. Are there other ports that have a bridge like this, or that kind of, I don't want to say are ripe for disaster, but that should be taking the lessons learned in Baltimore immediately and perhaps taking safeguards in order to prevent something like this from happening again?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when you look at the infrastructure buildup in Baltimore, they invested huge amounts of money. They brought new cranes, they dredged, increased the roads, rail capacity, but they didn't look at this because maritime infrastructure doesn't get the priority. And it has a lot to do with the divided nature. The ports are run by state and local municipal governments, whereas, bridges and waterways are federal. And, even in the big infrastructure bill that passed, $3 trillion, a fraction of a percent went toward things maritime. And, as we've seen vessels expand in size, I graduated from New York Maritime in 1989, 4,500 TEU ship was massive. It was huge. It was like, holy cow, you can't get bigger than this. And what we saw, especially since 2000, was companies like Maersk introduced the S class, then the E class, then the triple E class, and now we're at 24,000 TEU vessels, and we've just seen them become these behemoths. And unfortunately, everything doesn't keep up. When they opened the new lane of the Panama Canal, and now you can go from 4,500 TEU ships to 15,000 TEU ships, because ships can now be longer, wider, and deeper. You increase the volume, you cube it, so you can go 3 times the size. Ports raced for this. I mean, we witnessed Savannah and Charleston and Houston and New York, New Jersey, and Baltimore racing to dredge the ports, increase their cranes so that they can get this business, because shippers wanted this. I want my cargo coming here. I don't want to have to transport it. I want my stuff on the dock in Baltimore because that's where I want it delivered in a short haul distance. So, it's a big difference on the East Coast, the West Coast, where you have a plethora of ports on the East Coast. On the West Coast, you got 3. You got LA, Long Beach, Oakland, and Seattle, Tacoma. That's basically it. So, you saw that competition, but the problem is who is looking at the big holistic picture where, okay, we've increased this, we've fixed this, but no, that bridge, we really didn't look at the bridge. And we see that in other ports right now. And this hopefully, unfortunately, in maritime law, regulations are written in blood, Jack's got to die, on Titanic to realize that we probably need more lifeboats, that you can't fit everybody on the door with rows. So, you need to change rules and regulations. And that's what's going to happen here.
Sure. Where does Baltimore go from here? I mean, with the big question, of course, look, obvious answer is, okay, they're gonna rebuild a bridge. It's gonna be a safer bridge. But what are the steps to remediate this? Is there, to your point earlier, is there a dive team that's going to go either one, pull up pieces of bridge in order to make it safe for a vessel to go in? Is there a new, is there a submarine that's going to go remap the harbor in Baltimore? Where does that port go from here?
So this actually kind of leads into the thing we were going to talk about, the Jones Act here, because the salvage operation here is going to be massive. There are three parts of this salvage operation. You've got the ship, number one, and matter of fact, the ship's owner has contracted with the salvage firm Resolve to salvage the ship. Remember, the ship's been damaged. It's actually aground on the bow and has severe bow damage from both ramming the pillar and having a bridge land on it. So there's questions about the stability of the vessel. We've got the bridge down, and the bridge is across a navigable channel. That channel is controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers. And then the bridge itself in other areas is controlled by Maryland DOT. So you actually have three different salvage firms that have been contracted by these three different entities to start working on it. Yet there's no unified command for it. There's a unified command, but there's no unified commander. So there's a big problem. So the first part's going to be removing the ship. They got to get the ship out of there, but that's going to take time. They've got to finish their investigation. They got to stabilize the vessel. They got to get the bridge off the vessel, and then they'll be able to move it out. In the meantime, you've got to start moving salvage assets into the area. And this is, I've talked to people in salvage right now about this. And one of the things that they're really hopping on, I think it's a really good point, is one of the reasons we have the Jones Act, which requires, for example, in coastal waters of the U.S., that ships that do business and operate within coastal waters be American-owned, American-flagged, American-crewed. Because we have these assets locally in Baltimore, in New Jersey, and even from the Gulf, they can get here a lot faster. There'll be some people who will say, well, there's better assets overseas. That'll take weeks to get here. They need to open the channel. And talking to one of the salvers recently, what he said is, listen, we're not gonna cut the bridge up. We're just gonna drag it out of the way. We're gonna get enough salvage assets in place, and we may have to break the bridge in some pieces, but we're gonna at least drag it out of the channel. And that's the way we can open up the port of Baltimore. They said once we get assets in place, once we get the bridge out, the ship out of the way, once we have the assets in place and everything's prepped, we can do this in a few days. We can literally drag that bridge out of the way. Now, the salvage to get everything up will take months. I mean, that's going to be a long-term salvage that takes place. But that's what we need. The problem right now in Baltimore is there's nobody in command, and you really need that. And I just did a video this morning on my channel that kind of talks about that, is because if you have these three different competing entities fighting for this, that's confusion, and you're going to have redundancy. Because the key thing here is open up the port of Baltimore. Baltimore's losing $100 million a day. This is a port that does $73 billion worth of trade annually. 43 million tons of cargo go through Baltimore. And Baltimore's not a big port. I mean, it's not even the top 10. But it's a well-rounded port. It moves containers. It moves bulk products, coal, sugar, salt. It moves cars. It moves passengers, big passenger terminal there. So it moves a little bit of everything. And right now, 90% of that port is inaccessible.
Got it. Okay. Sal, one question we ask every guest on Hammer Down. You're kind of uniquely positioned to answer this one as an educator. The theory behind this show is that supply chain professionals and supply chain entities do a terrible job of positioning supply chain as a cool career path, right? Like every mechanical engineer says, I want to build robots. And nobody in warehousing is saying, robots are here. Nobody in ports are saying, it's robots are here, right? Like you want to build something cool, it's coming to our industry. What advice would you give a kid, or what advice do you give kids that are thinking about supply chain as a career path and kind of debating whether or not this is the right path for them.
I make that argument all the time. I tell my business schools, like, why are we not doing supply chain? This is the thing to do. I'm telling you, this is the industry to be in, because it incorporates everything. I'm a historian. I'm trained by historian, but I deal more with supply chain than anything else. And I think it's funny. I joke that, historians are great at supply chain because we look at the big picture. We get down into the details. We can see things. We can do, we can read documents. We can process it. We're analytical. We write well. We can talk. That's the kind of skills that are sometimes missing in supply chain. Every industry has this problem. They have to get out and educate. They have to make it interesting to them. And, I'm on social media. I talk about this all the time. And I think it's a very important process. The way kids learn today is through social media in some ways. It's got to be visual. You got to be able to see it. What's the potential in this career? I was just at a conference and you're talking about robots, where I was talking to guys who do that. They do robots in the warehouse. And, one of the things they talked about was, it's so funny, you still need people because the part of getting the stuff off the shelf into the robot's the hard part. That's really expensive. But, if the robot can take you to the shelf where the thing is and you dump it in, that's easy. Then you go. And, this is the thing we need. We need to be able to convey this. I was hoping that 2020, 2021, the global supply chain really raised that bar. I think people became very cognizant. I think it hit home for a lot of people when they went to the stores and all of a sudden there's no toilet paper. I mean, that hit it home. That was a clear sign that the global supply chain was in problems. And, but the question is, why did that happen? It's a really interesting story when you get down to it, why it happened and how we design a system that's designed to basically not fluctuate too much. And I think we need to do a better job of educating. We need to do a better job of conveying this. Problem today is, I'll tell you, at my university, Campbell University here in North Carolina, it's not unusual for our seniors to go into their job and they're only in it for 11 months till they hop to the next one. So you really need to convey to them, really the versatility of supply chain, because it has mobility. You can change your area. It's not truck driving. You can do that if you want, but there's other elements of it. There are so many levels you can do. It's physical, it's mental. There's desk work. There's, it's really white collar, blue collar. There's almost anything you want to do. And the mobility in it is the key, I think. And that's the thing we need to talk about. It is not just one thing. It's economics, it's logistics, it's computers, it's robots. It's all those elements that really come to bear. And so I think we need to do a better job at that. And one of the reasons your podcast is out there and my YouTube channel is out there is because we're trying to hit that.
Sal Mercogliano, thank you so much for being a guest on Hammer Down. I know you got a busy day today, sir. I appreciate you immensely.
Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.